Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Many of you may know that I am active in the interfaith community and interfaith dialogue. I've been involved with organizations that cross religious and cultural boundaries for as long as I have been an adult. In fact, was probably introduced to work with other groups by my own rabbis before I was an adult. I've always seen it and understood how important it is in this world. I've also understood that as an American rabbi, I am an American rabbi. And so I work with more than just our own community. And it's not simply a question of what the rabbis referred to as mipnei darkei shalom. That is, you do this for the sake of peace, although it does create peace. But it's also part of the inspiration that I receive for living a Jewish life in this world. And I see it as part of the obligations of being an American Jew. I also understood it in relation to the ninth plague, the plague of darkness that I spoke about last night. I mentioned that Ralph Ellison wrote a book in the 1930s entitled The Invisible Man. And he referred to the fact that most Black people were simply invisible to white people, and that there would never be advancement in racial harmony or justice in our nation until people began to see each other. That's why the text says that there was darkness amongst the Egyptians, but light amongst the Hebrews, because Bnei Yisrael, they were able to see each other. But I don't believe the teaching only applies to us with ourselves. I think it applies to us with others. We have to be able to see others. If we don't see others, we tend to fear them, and that creates danger. The lack of seeing the disenfranchised or the poor, the immigrants, it's a major stumbling block to the advancement of humankind, and I would say human freedom. And so the work isn't simply symbolic, it's meaningful. And there's an attempt to gather and to listen to each other, this clergy group, not just because of our shared communal interests, but also because each one of us who comes to the meeting understands that we are enriched by it. Father Andrew Sherman of St. Gregory's Episcopal Church and I began this group about, I guess, almost 15 years ago now. And I've stated over and again regarding our monthly meetings that even if no other clergy were to show up, we would continue to be there for each other. We would do so in order to share ideas and struggles, to support each other in our successes and our failures, our challenges, because we share a lot. That open and true commitment to relationship is why our interfaith clergy group works. We truly are respectful of each other and for each other. Actually, I would like to let you in one time on the conversations that take place. For we had a conversation that was a more challenging conversation this past week, and to see the level of respect that each person has for the other is really quite incredible. This is a rather long introduction, however, to tell you about a conversation that existed this past week. One of my younger colleagues raised the following question. He said, what will you guys, men and women, Jews and Christians and Muslims, what will you speak about regarding January 6th? Will you talk about it this coming weekend? And the group was silent for a moment. And then it opened a rather robust conversation about values and truth and a willingness to be open. To my surprise, most of the colleagues on this past Thursday, both the rabbis and the ministers who were present, said they don't want to talk about January 6th. They feared speaking about it. And they said that the placing of a political conversation in their sermons has become more and more divisive, even when they try to frame it in a way that everyone can learn from. One said that we're all so bombarded by the news that and the news is so disturbing that there's so much partisanship in the world and in his congregation that I'd prefer not to bring it to my sanctuary, he said. I'd like to preserve the sanctuary as a sanctuary, a place of retreat and peace, a place that's an escape from the outside world. And I think we all understand that sentiment, and certainly much of the time, that's true. And another said, don't you think that people want to hear what our religious traditions say about the world? However, he said, I'm simply a pastor, and my job is to bring comfort. And another said, but I also need to express the aspiration of the prophet. And the prophet would always speak his truth to the people. And I indicated to him, that's why no one wanted to be a prophet. That when one felt the call of prophecy, like Jeremiah, there would be a desire to run from it. It wasn't a good job. It didn't pay well, and nobody liked you. The third said the following: I want to create comfort and peace. Yet at other times, I know that my most important job is to be a priest. And by that, he meant he wants to be one who leads and directs ritual. There's a place for the challenging role of the prophet, he said. There's a place for the one who will speak truth to power. But religion is also about ritual. The great jurist Oliver Wendell Holmes once said, the job of the minister is to bring comfort to those who are in trouble and in pain. But Holmes said also, the job of the minister is to afflict those who are too comfortable. It's a tough line to walk. There was a former great rabbi, Zichrono Livracha, Simon Greenberg from Har Zion in Philadelphia, who I had as a professor at JTS. He was a professor both of Bible and practical rabbinics. Greenberg once said to me that if you don't bother people, if you don't have people who disagree with you, then you're probably not speaking your truth. You're probably not fulfilling your responsibility. It's easy to get everybody to agree with you. You can sugarcoat everything, he said. But I realized also that Greenberg said these words after he was retired. I don't know how challenging he was when he was in the pulpit, but he certainly had a reputation of being a great rabbi. Years ago, I believed that the essential work as a darshan, one who gives sermons, is found in the following. And that is, I'm not a politician, I'm a rabbi. And so I have to use the texts of our tradition and allow the texts to teach meaning. And what I know is that our texts are laden with values. Our texts are what shape my worldview as a rabbi, as a Jew, and as a human being. I mentioned recently that any given week, there's a text, there's a parsha that seems to have something that resonates in our world on that time, at that time, during that week, something that resonates with our own lives and our own experience. And then also the text often serves as a mirror for that which I have found to be regularly true, because each week I have a conversation, or I'll study a text, a different text, read an article, watch a film, read a book, find in it something that is also related to the text that we're reading. It is, I know it is true, because it's been happening for 40 years to me. I've never had difficulty, I shouldn't say never, maybe a couple of weeks out of 40 years, I've had difficulty finding something in the text that doesn't relate to what goes on in our world. So back to my interfaith colleagues. One of my responses brings me to Jewish history and history itself, because history is a source of my identity as a Jew. And I have learned that God makes himself or herself known through history. We learn about God through what happens to people. And we learn about ourselves through our history. And I know we've all learned certain things from the histories that we know. And one I hear, and we as a people repeat it over and again, and it comes from many of the thinkers, philosophers, and historians of the Holocaust, is that little lies, or perhaps any lie that's repeated over and again, eventually is believed. Goebbels served as Hitler's propaganda minister, and he developed lies. And those lies became subjectively true to people. And part of that was the dehumanization of Jews, of course, but also of other people. They were at the center of the lie. And the lie was repeated over and again until many, many Germans saw the dehumanization of Jews as being part of what would make Germany great. Slavery, as we understand from the Torah, also begins with the dehumanization of others. Racism dehumanizes. I believe that voter suppression is also a form of dehumanization. Things can start with little lies, and unless the little lies are challenged, the lies grow. And eventually we find ourselves in a place like we see ourselves today on January 8th, 2022, where there's a big lie that still exists among a large percentage of our population. And despite all the evidence that was affirmed by 93 senators voting in multiple court cases and recounts, that the last election was stolen, in many circles, that big lie still exists. Keep repeating it. Repeat it over and over and over. And even reasonable people then begin to doubt the truth. One of the things I wonder the most about January 6th is contained in the question that there are so many who claim that what happened last year on January 6, 2021 was really nothing. It was a protest with a little bit of violence. Or the people that they saw with their own eyes weren't really the people who were doing it. I heard something as outrageous as the fact that it was Black Lives Matter that was responsible for it. The lie has more power than what we see with our own eyes. It wasn't so important, they said. It was just one day. Those who saw the holy place, the central holy temple of democracy being ravaged, lives were threatened, lives were lost, and they say that it wasn't true. You see, the lesson from our history is that a truth that's left uncorrected, a lie that is left alone, gains great power. You've heard me tell you over and again that the maternal side of my family escaped Nazi Germany, at least up to a certain generation they did. My grandmother said over and again to her husband and her family, we cannot ignore what we are seeing. She read newspapers. She knew what was happening in the world. And she kept repeating to the family, we can't ignore this, we're seeing it. And I think about the great thinker who once said, there are none so blind as those who refuse to see. And so we need to think about the story, and the story that's before us in the Torah, the book of Exodus. So I'm talking now about Pharaoh and the narrative of our slavery. Why, for God's sake, do we repeat aspects of this story year after year after year? Why do we repeat these stories when we come to these parshiot, when we daven twice a day, when we observe Pesach, when we recite Shachrit and Mariv, when we recite the Shema? Why? Over and over and over again, we tell the story. And what we read this morning is before we were even liberated. God tells us that we have to tell our children this story. It's because in our consciousness, there must be a realization, not just a memory of Pharaoh, but a realization of the danger of authoritarianism and totalitarianism. in ways that there are leaders who wish to supplant God, leaders who want to dehumanize other people, leaders who corrupt power, leaders who think they own and can abuse the masses. I believe that the Torah comes to us for a number of different reasons. And from early on in Genesis, it comes to warn us against the idolatry that can come with human power. I believe the Torah is a thesis against idolatry, and that idolatry has to do not with the worship of little stone items or wooden items, but has to do with the power of money or the power of man. In our story, at the end of the day, the demagogue loses. My teacher, Moshe Halbertal, once taught a class where his words gave me great hope. He said the following: if something is unjust, it is unsustainable. It won't last forever. We believe that justice has to prevail. And so our command is tzedek, tzedek tirdof. We will pursue justice, and we will do so in a just way. And we believe that we need to continuously work for that day. And perhaps we repeat it over and over again because of the very fact that in every age, tyrants arise. And in every age, we have to face them. We can never ignore criminal behavior. We can never ignore criminal behavior, no matter who commits it. We have to uphold justice. Look at the flow of this story. As I mentioned it 2 weeks ago in the interview that David Brooks did with Leon Kass, we don't simply have a story of slavery that brings us to a conclusion with a liberation tale. Our story is different. It's a story where the slaves, through the power of God, are redeemed and miraculously escape, but they escape and leave Egypt not just for personal liberation, they're brought to Sinai. They're not brought to Sinai to watch the fireworks. They're brought to Sinai to receive the Torah. They're brought to Sinai to receive a law that's bigger than any man or any woman. They are all, every one of them and every one of us, responsible for it, responsible for that Torah, responsible to uphold it. In the United States of America, although there is great influence of the Bible, the Constitution is our Torah. In the history of nations, the innovation of American democracy, which sees all people being created equal, all sharing the same creator, all subject to the law of the land, whether you're rich or you're poor, whether you're powerful or powerless. Our founding fathers were rooted in the European Enlightenment and in the Old Testament. And that's why they knew that the smooth transition of power was absolutely necessary for the continuity of our nation. That's why George Washington refused to be the king, although there was a popular idea that he should be the king because of what a wonderful military leader and president he was, but he said no. Power is not to entitle anyone. Power is dangerous. And needless to say, that's what we are living through now. We're living through it in this country, and so many nations of the world are living with it now. So here's the good news. I want to end with good news. Although the mistruths get a lot of attention, the truth is most people don't believe them. Most people do believe what they see, and most people see clearly. The truth is we still have systems standing that adjudicate, and they are operating. And we know that there have been great challenges to democracy and decency in the past, and we have always come through, and we will again. But it will depend on our support of decent leadership people who are willing to engage in conversations with respect, people who will repeat the truth over and over and over again. Remembering the past is an essential responsibility. That's why the story of the Exodus will never leave our lips. There is a reason we are told to tell our children. There is a reason we listen to it again and again. We've heard this before, and I can't find the source of this, but the idea is that America is an idea. America is an idea. And the idea represents a growth in the consciousness of human freedom. The idea stands for liberty, democracy, fairness, justice, and law. And we know it will always be challenged by those who want personal power, those who want to repress others, those who want ownership to lay only in their hands. But the truth is that the will of the people will prevail. Finally, and I want to repeat the following. It's from the Leon Cass interview. As we're commanded to tell our children the story from the beginning of the Exodus, let us realize the singular and significant importance of open, critical conversations and education. Let us be the voice for that, not only amongst our own children, but within our community and throughout this country. We, the Jewish people, know what education means. We know what it has meant for the preservation of our people for thousands of years. And we know what education has meant for our own success. Torah is defined as teaching, and we can't forget that. We can never forget our teaching. I'm so grateful for the parshiot of these weeks. I'm so grateful because I realize how they continue to speak to us. I'm grateful to be with you, our people. I'm going to stay hopeful. It's my choice. And I will work with my fellow clergy to see that the voice of the prophet will continue to challenge and be heard, to see that the work of the priest and the ritual will continue to give each one of our faith traditions a structure that helps ward off chaos and allows us to retain humility, to see that we will remain pastors who will help bring comfort in our sanctuaries, and to make sure that the rabbis continue to teach the lessons that matter, the lessons of our Torah, the lessons of our tradition. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Shabbat shalom.